You know what's weird? We obsess over boomers and their real estate. We analyze millennials and their avocado toast. Gen Z and their side hustles get entire think pieces written about them. But there's this whole generation sitting quietly in the middle, managing money in the strangest way possible, and almost nobody talks about them. Generation X, born between 1965 and 1980. They're your coworker who quietly accumulated more wealth than millennials could imagine, yet behaves like they're one paycheck away from disaster. Your uncle who has $50,000 sitting safely in savings but refuses to replace his 15-year-old Toyota. The friend who will drop $500 on concert tickets without hesitation, then spend 20 minutes comparing coupons at the grocery store like every cent matters. And here's what nobody tells you. Their money psychology is completely unlike any other generation. And it all traces back to one specific moment in economic history that rewired how they see safety, risk, and survival. Picture this. It's 1983. You're 10 years old, and your dad takes you to the bank. You watch him deposit his paycheck from the same company he's worked at for years. The teller knows his name. The numbers are steady. There's a pension waiting in the future, a savings account that actually earns interest, a mortgage that will be paid off on schedule. Everything makes sense. Work hard, save money, retire comfortably. The formula feels solid, predictable, trustworthy. Now flash forward to 2008. You're 35 years old. You followed the formula exactly the way you were taught. You did everything right. And then you watch your retirement account get cut in half, your home value collapse, and your once secure company start laying off people who had been loyal for decades. In that moment, something shifts deep inside your brain. The formula wasn't broken. The formula was never guaranteed. And that betrayal quietly shaped every dollar decision they would make for the rest of their lives. And once that shift happens, you start to notice something strange about Generation X. They became the most anxious about retirement, yet somehow the most consistent savers at the same time. It sounds contradictory, but it actually makes perfect sense when you understand the psychology behind it. According to recent retirement studies, a huge percentage of Gen X openly admit they're terrified about their future, worried that what happened before could happen again. But instead of freezing, they prepare. Psychologists call this defensive pessimism. It's the mindset where you assume things might go wrong, so you build layers of protection long before trouble arrives. And for Gen X, this wasn't theory. It was survival training learned in real time. They watched their parents lose pensions that were supposed to last a lifetime. They saw neighbors sell homes at losses. They graduated into recessions where doing everything right still wasn't enough. So they didn't become careless. They became cautious architects of backup plans. And this is where another behavior starts to make sense. Long before millennials made the term popular, Generation X quietly invented the side hustle mindset. But unlike younger generations chasing freedom or fame, their motivation was very different. It wasn't about quitting their jobs to chase passion. It was about building escape routes in case the main road collapsed. You'll see it everywhere once you start looking. The coworker with a steady 9-to-5 who also runs a small consulting gig at night. The neighbor renting out a spare room, not because they love real estate, but because extra income feels like oxygen. The friend selling handmade items online, not to become famous, but to create one more safety net. And underneath all of these choices sits a powerful memory that never fully disappears. The image of loyal employees walking out of buildings carrying cardboard boxes after decades of service. That moment burned into their thinking like a permanent warning sign. Never depend on one single source of income. Not because ambition demands it, but because experience taught them what happens when security disappears without warning. And once you understand that fear of relying on a single income, another pattern suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. Generation X doesn't just protect their income, they protect their trust. And that's why their loyalty looks so strange from the outside. They will switch jobs without hesitation, walk away from corporations that once promised stability, yet remain fiercely loyal to certain brands, stores, and services they discovered decades ago. At first glance, it feels inconsistent, but when you look deeper, it becomes psychological logic. Institutions, to them, feel abstract and replaceable. People and familiar brands feel personal and accountable. When a company lays you off, you get paperwork. When a trusted local business disappoints you, you get answers. So they stick with what proved reliable when everything else collapsed. And this leads to another behavior that confuses marketers and financial advisors alike. Generation X saves aggressively, builds emergency funds, tracks expenses, and still spends significant money on experiences like concerts, travel, and live events. That combination looks reckless to outsiders. But in their minds, it's one of the most rational decisions they ever made. Because somewhere along the way, they learned a lesson that younger generations are only beginning to understand. Physical assets can disappear. Markets can crash. Property values can sink. But experiences become memory, and memory becomes permanent wealth no recession can erase. And here's where the real viral insight hides. Generation X didn't just adapt to instability. They redefined what security actually means. Security to them is no longer a single number in a bank account. It's layers. Layers of income, layers of savings, layers of relationships, layers of proof that if one system fails, another system can take over. This layered mindset also explains something that often surprises financial professionals. Many Gen X individuals prefer managing their own finances, reading books, building spreadsheets, double-checking investments, and trusting their own judgment over outside advice. Not because they think they're smarter than experts, but because they watched experts fail before. It's not arrogance, it's memory. It's not stubbornness, it's pattern recognition built from decades of watching promises collapse in real time. And once you see how deeply memory shapes their decisions, another behavior that once looked outdated suddenly starts to feel incredibly intelligent. Generation X keeps backups for everything. Not just emergency funds, not just side income, but records, documents, and proof of ownership. Many of them still keep paper statements, printed contracts, and physical copies of important records, even in a world that promises everything is safely stored in the cloud. To younger generations, this can feel unnecessary, almost paranoid. But to Gen X, it feels like common sense. They lived through computer failures, lost files, banking errors, and systems that promised permanence but delivered silence when things went wrong. So they built redundancy into their lives the same way engineers build redundancy into airplanes. Not because they expect failure every day, but because they understand that when failure happens, preparation becomes survival. And that mindset leads directly into one of their most misunderstood financial behaviors: debt. Generation X carries significant debt, often larger mortgages than previous generations, yet remains extremely cautious about smaller, unpredictable debt like credit cards. On the surface, that looks inconsistent. But again, there is a logic underneath. Debt that has a clear timeline, a predictable payment, and a defined ending feels manageable. Debt that grows quietly, compounds without warning, and stretches into the unknown feels dangerous. They learned early that chaos is what destroys financial stability, not responsibility. So they don't fear borrowing, they fear losing control. And when you connect all these patterns together, the deeper lesson becomes impossible to ignore. Generation X isn't confused about money. They're trained by experience. They're not pessimistic. They're historically informed. They're not obsessed with safety. They're designing resilience in a world that taught them security is temporary. And here's the surprising truth that applies far beyond one generation. Your money habits aren't random. They are echoes of moments that shaped your understanding of safety, risk, and trust. Maybe it was watching your parents struggle, maybe it was losing a job unexpectedly, maybe it was seeing someone close to you recover from financial disaster. Whatever the moment was, it quietly rewrote the rules in your mind. So instead of judging your habits or comparing them to others, start asking a more powerful question. What did my past teach me about survival? And if this story made you see money in a different way, take a moment to reflect on one habit you have today that once protected you from something uncertain. Share it in the comments because someone else reading your story might recognize their own. And if you want to understand the hidden psychology behind money, risk, and long-term wealth decisions, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because the way you handle money isn't just about numbers. It's about memory, adaptation, and the quiet strategies we build to survive the unexpected.